Hi everyone! Welcome to the first video in this series on how to create an oil painting completely from imagination. In this series, I'll walk you through my process of creating an oil painting from start to finish, and today we'll start with idea generation and thumbnailing. I'll show you how I slowly mold my ideas and inspirations into a solid concept that can be developed into an epic narrative painting. Let's get into it. Ideas can arrive in many forms and shapes, especially when you're not actively searching for them. Inspiration can be found in the most unexpected things, and the idea for this particular painting came to me while I was taking a walk in a nearby park. I saw these funny birch trees with patterns that looked like eyes, and I knew I had to somehow incorporate them into a painting. The opportunity presented itself almost immediately. Birches happen to be a prominent theme in the aesthetic of the Russian folklore, and later I decided to pick up my old book of Russian fairy tales. Keep in mind that these are the grim, dark kind of tales, and maybe that's why I turned out the way that I did. As I flipped through the pages, I landed on the story of Vasilisa the Beautiful, which is a fairy tale that I've known since childhood, and it immediately sparked so many ideas. Before drawing any of them though, I wanted to warm up first. I recommend warming up with some pencil studies before you try to put any ideas on paper, because it's going to make it much easier, especially if the subject of the studies is related to what you have in mind for your painting. I picked out a couple of Pinterest pictures of women with long hair in long dresses, because I'll need it later for visualizing my Vasilisa. At the end of the day, it's drawing from references that's going to improve your ability to draw and paint from imagination. In the meantime, let me give you a quick recap of the fairy tale so you understand the context. It's a story not unlike that of Cinderella. Vasilisa is a beautiful young girl whose stepmother and stepsisters hate her and send her into the forest to fetch some light. She goes out into the dark and walks through the forest right into the hut of Baba Yaga, a witch you might have heard of who has a nasty habit of eating people. After Vasilisa completes her tasks, Baba Yaga gives her this skull with glowing eyes to light her way back home and sends her back through the forest, and that's the scene that I'm going to paint. When it comes to creating an oil painting from imagination, the first step for me is idea generation. For this piece, I started by writing down all of the elements that stood out to me in the story, and that's Vasilisa's magical doll that guides her, the skull on a stick with glowing eyes, Baba Yaga's creepy chicken-legged hut, the mysterious black horseman who symbolizes night, and of course the eerie birch trees with eye-like patterns, which are not a part of the story, but I want to include them anyway. With these ideas in mind, I began collecting references and putting together a mood board in Figma. In here, I'll include some artworks that I'm inspired by, as well as some pictures that I found on Pinterest and some other sources. This helps me visualize how my ideas might come together in the final composition, and they'll later provide references for my thumbnails. For Vasilisa, I was really thinking of a facial type similar to Danielle Galligan, who played Nina Zenik in Shadow and Bone, so I added her to my mood board too. Now that I have my inspirations in front of me, I'm going to make some sketches of the elements that I want to include in my painting. In the story, Vasilisa has a talking doll left to her by her late mother, who helps her throughout the story, but it's rarely featured in illustrations, so I really wanted to include it in my painting. I found some references of traditional Russian cloth dolls and created my own version based on them. Then, of course, there's the skull with the glowing eyes, which has become an iconic image and also presents interesting opportunities for lighting, so of course I'm going to include that too. Conveniently, I have a life-sized model of a human skull, which I'll be using throughout this project to guide me in creating an accurate image. I also added a cloth wrapped around the stick that would be used to secure the skull and add a bit more visual interest. I did a small sketch of a birch eye, one of those interesting marks that sparked this whole idea. I want them to look natural but also distinctly similar in shape to an actual eye to look eerie. The story features 3 horse riders, a white one, a red one, and a black one, each symbolizing the dawn, the sun, and the night respectively. When Vasilisa leaves Baba Yaga's hut with the glowing skull, she meets the black horse rider on her way home, so I could throw him into the mix as well. And this sketch also gives me an opportunity to practice drawing some birches. Finally, it would be interesting to include Baba Yaga's infamous hut that walks on chicken legs. By the way, I'm not making these up. If you're looking for some crazy imagery to spark your imagination, go read some Russian fairy tales. Now, I need to start bringing everything together by figuring out the pose of my central character, Vasilisa herself. I have a vague idea for how I want her to look, and it slowly takes shape as I start putting her together. I added a long braid to her that was inspired by one of my warm-up studies, as well as the skull and the doll that I sketched earlier. At this point, I'm trying to capture the rough silhouette, so I try not to get too bogged down in the details. It's always good to consider more than one pose before you settle, so I did another pose from the back, trying to add more dynamism to it. I felt like one of the two should work, so I did small composition thumbnails for each of the 2 poses. Thumbnails like this are great for seeing whether you have a clear silhouette. I decided that ultimately I prefer the first pose and composition because it allows me to include more points of interest, including the doll and the things that Vasilisa is leaving behind, like the hut and the horse rider. It would also be easier to execute because of its simplicity, although I'd be sacrificing some of the dynamism. Now it's time to make the final thumbnail for this painting. I'm basically expanding on the small thumbnail that I made earlier and adding a bit more detail. I included the horse rider here, but I'm still undecided whether it's going to be him or the hut in the final version. If you have time, it's also great to make several thumbnails to figure out the value structure of your painting. But my value structure is pretty simple because of the obvious light source, which is the skull. So I'm leaving that for the next step, which will be a large preparatory drawing. I'll be drawing on the same scale as the painting surface, so it will allow me to figure out all the details in that step. Thank you for joining me in this first very important step of creating an oil painting from imagination, and I hope you enjoyed watching me generate ideas, collect inspirations, and develop thumbnails. Let me know if you have any questions and stay tuned for the next part. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to this channel for more art shenanigans, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!